As the first speaker.
Good morning, and welcome to Mr. Watt and his team. I have 4 or 5 themes I wanted to work through, so when I'm halfway through, you might give me a shout.
I will.
Please, do you read much, Mr. Watt?
Do I read?
Do you read?
As in books, newspapers,
books,
magazines, periodicals.
Yeah.
I read a good bit, yeah.
I brought some documents that might be of use to you. The first is CSO.
Are props allowed, Chair, this meeting? Are props allowed? I won't bring my waste bag, dump it on the table or anything.
It's a CSO document on in-work poverty, income and living conditions. There's a lot of helpful data in it. There's also, I brought you a NERI report. It's on earnings, low pay, again, in-work quality. And there's also a document from Social Justice Ireland, just published as well. A new social contract for a new century, lots of data in it, which might be of use to you. So I'll leave them for you for later. Can I start, Mr. Watt, with the Special EU Programmes Body? Can you explain to me first of all what that is?
So that's the programme body that's involved in managing the 2 main North-South programmes. There's the Interreg programme and there's the Peace and Reconciliation programme. So that's one of the bodies established under the Good Friday Agreement, so that manages the projects, manages the application process. So in effect, there are 2 funds, various different strands of the funds, various different themes set out, and the SUPPB, they organise the process of inviting grant applications, vetting grants, allocating the money. The accountability mechanism is as you probably recall, Deputy, reports to our department and our counterpart in Northern Ireland, DFP, and the 2 relevant ministers then have overall responsibility.
Is it the case that your department was advised in 2014 that there was a risk to funds paid to a Peace 3 project? Is that the case? Can you talk to us very quickly?
Yeah, there was an issue about a payment made to a company, and it came to the attention of the body that there was irregularities and allegations of fraud, and on receipt of that, payments were suspended, and an investigation has been undertaken in respect to that.
The department had provided funding of 181,438 to the project in 2010.
Yeah,
is that
that's
correct?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were.
Yeah. So the matter was referred by the Police Service Northern Ireland to the Public Prosecution Service, and they concluded there are no further lines of investigation which would support a positive prosecution. So it's closed at this stage, the issue, but it looks, Deputy, as if that money is going to be lost to the exchequers.
And can I just ask, that's what I wanted to get to. I'm trying to establish why it would be lost. But before we come to a view on that, is it a separate accountable body first? Or who is it accountable to? Is it accountable to your department? So
the body is in effect accountable to us and DFP in Northern Ireland, and it's accountable to the 2 ministers.
So if there is a loss to the taxpayer because of irregularities, who then would be responsible for that? In terms of oversight.
Yeah. So in effect, the Peace and Reconciliation programme is 85% funded from the EU. So we would pay ourselves, and the UK Treasury would pay, and then we'd recoup back the monies from the EU. So in this case, Deputy, I need to check for you, but I think in this case the loss will be borne by the 2 exchequers, Ireland and the UK.
You've said that already, but what I asked was, given that there is going to be a loss, and I'm going to come to that in a second, what department will be responsible for that? I know the organisation itself, whoever was responsible for the irregularities, is ultimately responsible, but in terms of governance, who is responsible?
So our department and the relevant department in Northern Ireland will be accountable for the loss. Yeah.
Okay. Why is there no prospect of recovering the money?
I believe my recollection of it, and it's a long time, Deputy, since I've looked at it, I believe that the lead partner in the company that has been dissolved, so I don't think the legal entity exists anymore. So I think that's why the money can't be recouped. I think that's the position. Yeah, the company, the lead partner has been dissolved in effect.
Yeah, that's my understanding also.
Okay.
So there's no legal entity in effect to pursue for
that's the only reason. It just wasn't legally possible then to pursue somebody for it, isn't it?
Because in effect the company is gone. It doesn't have any assets anymore. It doesn't exist. So
the former directors, was there directors of this company? Had it a board of directors? Had it, what was the construct of the company?
I don't know. I guess it did have directors. It would have had.
And would
had a
directors
fiduciary
not
duty.
be responsible? Could they not be pursued? Could they not be?
I imagine the detail would have to be got from SEUPV. That is audited by me and by the Controller and Auditor General of Northern Ireland, and the accounts are presented.
The makeup of the company, whatever, was it a limited company? What was it? Had it directors? What were their responsibilities? Could a note on that be?
We'll come back to you. Yeah, it's 2014 when the issue came to our attention, and we pursued it at that time in order to recover the funds. But the conclusion from the people who are close to what's going on is that there isn't a legal avenue. But we'll come back to you, Deputy, in relation to the details. I don't recall whether it was a limited company or a partnership. I'm not exactly sure the structure. I don't recall.
Okay, that's fine. The second issue is there was a settlement with the Revenue Commissioners in June 2015, was there not, by your department? Can you just give us very quickly an overview of why that was necessary, why a settlement had to be made?
Yeah, there was a settlement, I think, for 27,800, and it was in relation to work that was contracted out from two barristers who were involved in advising the Department in relation to the Statute Law Revision Programme. And there were differing views in relation to, between ourselves and the Department, ourselves and the Revenue Commissioners, into whether this would be subject to either professional service withholding tax or PAYE. We reached a view, and then further discussions with the Revenue, they disagreed with that. So on settlement of it, we had to pay a further amount. So it was a different interpretation of exactly what the relationship of the people involved in the contract with the Department. And obviously, if the Revenue came to a different view, we have to then make that settlement with the Revenue.
Was that a voluntary disclosure to Revenue, or did Revenue come to yourselves?
So it was part of their review of our tax compliance, and as part of that review, it was a difference of opinion, and we had a discussion with them about it. And then after that, then we accepted the.
You said, and was there interest and penalties?
I don't think there would be. No, not from a public body to the Revenue Commissioners in respect of that. So it was just a different interpretation of whether the professional service withholding tax would apply or whether it was a PAYE.
Okay. We have one minister now for two departments. I know you can't talk about policy, but in terms of your own position, given now that we have one minister, there's talks of the both departments merging. Are you still the accounting officer? Are you on par with Mr. Moran, who was here earlier? Like, you're not a subordinate to him, are you?
Is he on par with me, maybe?
Well,
is he on par with me, Deputy? I'm the accounting officer for the Department of Public Expenditure Reform, and Derek Moran is the accounting officer for the Department of Finance.
So
the two legal structures. The two legal structures are as remain. Yep.
That's very good. But there's a possibility they could be merged, but they're not at the moment. It's just simply we have one minister for two departments. Is that it? Okay. There was a lot of talk after the last election about changing the budgetary process, and I think that came from a European report, or was it an international report, where it was felt that we had far too much emphasis on what was called one big bang on budget day.
Yeah.
And what we needed was a more elongated budgetary process that was more consultative, more engaging, and so on. So can you very quickly just, because this will obviously come under your own remit, and there was a number of promises made as well in relation to an independent budgetary office, which was also to be established. But in terms of the budget process, can you explain to me then what that new elongated process was to consist of, or does consist of?
So this is part of the overall move as part of the our commitments, EU commitments to semesterise the budget process. So our domestic elements now are aligned with what's required at EU level. So there are a number of different elements to it. So obviously we publish a budget set of proposals in the middle of October. Social welfare bill and finance bills.
Well before that, I'm talking about well before this.
Well, let me start from that, and then so that's then the social welfare bill and the finance bill. And they're considered by the Oireachtas, voted on by the Oireachtas. So then we publish in February, March, the Master Returns, where the Department of Finance would submit the returns to the European Commission in respect of the general government balance and the fiscal position for the preceding year. And then we prepare appropriations accounts and finance accounts and so on in the normal way. We now produce a performance report, which is a new edition, which sets out not only the allocations, what we've spent in respect to the preceding year, but also setting out in detail what outputs and outcomes. And that was a new report that we published in April. In order to encourage, in order to have more dialogue, we have the National Economic Dialogue, which took place over the last number of weeks, where the Taoiseach and ministers talk about the budget and hear from a whole variety of different interest groups in terms of what their budget priorities are. Then we produce the summary economic statement, and that's going to be published by the Minister next week, and that sets out the updated macro view of the economy, updated view about where we are in terms of 2017, updated view in terms of the position for 2018, and sets out the broad strategy and the resources that are available in respect of 2018.
Was the summer economic statement
that will be published?
Summer economic statement not to be completed by April? Was that not the target date?
I think previous years.
This year in
so previous years it was published before the National Economic Dialogue, but this year, because obviously there was a change of administration, change of government, it was felt appropriate that the new government should have an opportunity to consider its budgetary strategy for 2018.
But you see, that doesn't chime now with respect, Mr. Watt, to what you talk about in your opening statement of openness and transparency. It doesn't chime really with the work of the Budget Oversight Committee that was established as well, where there was to be greater input into the budgetary process. What was agreed, what was signed off on, and what we were told was going to be part of this new open, transparent, consultative process was that we would have a summer economic statement first, then we would have the National Economic Dialogue. Simply because a government decides that they're going to rejig departments, in my view, doesn't mean then that should not happen. So I'm a bit concerned that already now we've reverted back to type. We're engaged in box ticking rather than genuine consultation. But that's my opinion. But I'm asking you, why was there a delay in the summer economic statement?
So the summer economic statement will be published next week. The Minister is discussing it with his colleagues.
But it was published previously before the economic dialogue.
I think we all know why the summer statement is going to be published next week and not,
we don't.
not
That's
4
why
weeks ago.
I'm asking.
Because we have a new government deputy, we have a new government, new Taoiseach, new minister. It's presumably appropriate for the new government to consider its budgetary strategy. But in parallel with this, the Minister has appeared in front of several Dáil committees over the last week discussing where he thinks the economy is and where the budget is. Myself and Derek Moran have attended the Budget Oversight Committee. And we spent several days at the National Economic Dialogue discussing with people. So there is a much more open approach and a different approach to doing budgeting. When I was involved in the Department of Finance in the early 90s, the budget was prepared and announced to the people on one day. There was no summary economic statement, there was no national dialogue, there was no oversight committee, there was no performance report, no master's returns, none of it. So the approach that we have now to budgeting is a very different approach. A much more open approach where deputies have an opportunity, based on parameters that are set out by the department, an opportunity to discuss the budget and the options that the government faces. So it's a very different situation. Obviously, it would have been better, more desirable, if the summary economic statement had come out in advance of the NED and earlier. And hopefully next year we get back to that.
Well, I would suggest for next year that would be the case. And I don't accept the reason why, but hopefully next year it will be before the National Economic Dialogue, because it does help to frame discussion at that event, which you were at as well.
Just over halfway.
Perfect. Can I ask about, I wanted to talk about capital spend, because it is something that we talked about with Mr. Moran, but also it is an issue where I think it's accepted almost universally that we have very low levels of capital spend, Mr. Watt. What we were talking to Mr. Moran about was the inflexibility of the fiscal rules in relation to capital spend. Can you give me, first of all, your own view in relation to that? And one of the questions I put to him was, well, what changes at European Union level are we seeking to enable us to have greater flexibility in how we invest in capital, given that it's accepted we have very low levels of investment? So can you first of all maybe just give your department's view of how rigid or not the rules are?
So for this year, we're proposing to spend £4.5 billion on exchequer capital. That's going to increase to £7.5 billion by 2021. The government, after the election last year, allocated £5 billion extra to capital spend and for the amounts that were set out. For this year, capital spend will increase by over 10%. Next year, it's going to increase by further 15-16%, and the following year by the same amount.
Could I just set out the... No, I need to stop you there, here. Like, if I wanted an outline of how much we spent on capital over the last number of years and what we were going to spend in future, I would have asked that. What I asked was how the fiscal rules apply to capital spend. And we've heard from the Department of Finance, I think even the Minister himself acknowledged today that the fiscal rules do need to be reviewed. So what I'm asking is, it's almost universally accepted. So if it's universally accepted that we need greater flexibility in the application of the fiscal rules to allow us to have more capacity in relation to capital spend, if that is universally accepted, what is your department requesting from the European Commission?
So, just in relation to capital spend, as I was saying, the current plans would have an increase in spending of 70% in 2021 compared to the spending last year. So, a very significant increase in spending based on the current plans, as well as a very significant increase in spending by the commercial semi-states in gas, electricity, ports, and so on. In terms of the fiscal rules, the Department of Finance is responsible for the application of the fiscal rules and has been involved in discussions with the European Commission about the application of those rules and the ongoing discussions about it. Just a few things to say. In the absence of fiscal rules from the EU, we would still have to manage our affairs in a way which put a constraint on resources, a constraint on the level of resources we have for current spending or for capital spending. So if we had an environment where there were only domestic rules or no rules, we'd still have to conduct our affairs in a way which would put a limit or constraint on how much.
We're 3 minutes now into your second contribution, and I still haven't heard anything from you. That
you allowed me to finish the contribution.
But you haven't said anything. If I could just be maybe more distinct. There's a debate happening outside of this chamber. We have the trade union movement with ICTU. We have IBEC in terms of the business groups. We have almost every group who are all saying that the fiscal rules in respect of capital are simply not fit for purpose. The Budget Scrutiny Committee is going to do a report which will say the same thing. So what I'm asking is, what is the department which is responsible for capital spend doing about it? What have you done in relation to engagement with your sister department, the Department of Finance, and also with the European Commission? So
what we've been doing, Deputy, is managing our affairs in a way which is enabling us to increase capital spend significantly, and we're going to increase capital spend by 70% between last year and 2021. So that's the main thing that we're doing. But in terms of the rules, no matter what the rules are, we need to manage our affairs in a way which is going to put a constraint on the amount of spending we have on the current and capital side. So we have to decide then to fund capital, and we can fund capital by borrowing within the rules, or we can fund capital by increasing taxation within the rules. That's possible for us. There's no bar on the government deciding, or any government deciding, that it wants to fund more capital or more current spending within the fiscal rules by taxing people and generating the revenue. But the rules are as constructed, count capital spending the same as all other spending, apart from the smoothing rule, which you'll be aware of, where you can take one quarter, so an increase of spending of 100 million only uses up 25 million of the fiscal space in any given year. By the end of the 4-year period, it takes up the full amount. So there is an issue there in relation to capital smoothing. The only change to the fiscal rules that would make a difference would be if, at an EU level, it was decided that capital would be treated in a different way, so that governments would be allowed to balance in respect of current spending and then borrow for capital purposes, the so-called golden rule, which is different to the approach which underpins the rules that we have at
Who
present.
sets the expenditure benchmark?
The expenditure benchmark is set by the Minister for Finance, by the Department of Finance in consultation with the European Commission.
And with the Commission, and that's not like a fixed amount, that is negotiable, isn't it? Within, obviously you have to work within the rules, but it isn't...
So it depends. The expenditure benchmark depends on whether you're in excessive deficit procedure or whether you're in preventative, and then if you're in the preventative arm, whether you've achieved your medium-term objective of a structural balance of 0.1 or 0.5, or if you're moving towards it. So where we are now, we're moving towards it. We're not there yet. So spending can grow in line with potential growth, adjusted for the conversion margin, which is a function of how far we are away. The deficit is away from the structural balance. When we get to the structural balance, then spending will be able to grow in line with potential growth, as debated between the Department of Finance and the European Commission.
I understood from this morning we exited the executive or the
excessive deficit, and we're now into the preventative arm.
And we're now in the stability growth.
In the preventative arm of the pact, yeah.
Yeah, so we've left the executive.
Maybe what would be helpful if Mr. Watt was able to furnish this committee with the application of the rules and the application of the rules in respect of capital spend. What flexibilities there has been agreed with the Commission in recent years in relation to capital spend. Smoothing is one. I think Mr. One of the officials from finance said there was others as well that they had succeeded in getting from the Commission in recent years as well. So whatever they are, you might just give us a note. But also, sorry, and not only what you've asked for, but specifically if there are other flexibilities that your department has sought but have not got, if you could furnish us with a report on that, it might just be helpful. Is it okay?
Yeah, that's the only issue in relation to capital spend is in relation to the smoothing issue. There are ongoing debates between the Department of Finance and the European Commission about the application of the rules because they're ambiguous, and we're talking about a structural balance which is not observable, it's unobservable. So there's always going to be this debate about what's potential growth, what's the convergence margin, and I'm sure you've spoken to the Department of Finance and they've set out the details. So it's always going to be uncertain and subject to discussion. We don't know how fast the economy can grow in potential terms, both in real and nominal, and we don't know at any given time where we are in the economic cycle. Are we close to potential output now? Is there an output gap? Is it a minus or a plus? So all those factors have an impact then on the extent to which we can grow spending. Okay. And as you know,
I want to come to public sector pay, but before I do so, I have a slight concern that outside of the Public Accounts Committee, there is an ongoing live necessary debate on the application of the fiscal rules, on the fairness of the fiscal rules, and whether or not they are fit for purpose. The Minister of Finance in a Dáil committee this morning gave a view, in his view, that they are not. But I don't get a sense of any urgency from either the Department of Finance or Public Expenditure and Reform that they recognise the debate that's going on outside of their own departments. But as I say, whatever information you have in terms of what changes you've got and what changes you seek, you might forward on to me. But I'm only giving you my opinion.
Well, I don't have to agree or disagree with your opinion. So
absolutely, that's the beauty of it.
If I can come to
public sector pay, can you give me your view on what was the you talked about industrial peace in respect of the new pay agreement. What was the key issue that brought about industrial unrest in the public service in recent years? What was the one issue that would have driven a lot of the industrial unrest?
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily think that the period we've gone through has been a period of industrial unrest.
Where there was industrial unrest in the public sector?
A very small number of, I think we had a strike with ASTI members in the secondary schools. I don't think any other public servants have served strike notice over the last, or gone out on strike. There may have been strike notices, but I don't think they went out on strike over the last number of years. Obviously, there are issues in relation to Lewis drivers and other drivers, but in the public service, I think the secondary teachers, the ASTI part of the secondary teachers, were the only ones where we went through that. There has, Deputy, as the economy has recovered, people's expectations about affordability, about what the state can afford, obviously changes, and people are looking that unemployment is falling, they're seeing wage growth in the private sector again, and obviously public servants, like everybody else, feel that they should benefit from the upturn in the economy. Clearly, public servants had very significant cutbacks in their pay during the crisis. The average pay reductions for the average teacher, guard and so on were 10–15%, and obviously there are very significant increases for those above that. So people legitimately have an expectation about having some of that pay reduction brought back to them. And I guess that's the context where we've had more of a heightened discussion about, more of a debate about how we manage this and how we manage resources and how we meet people's expectations about pay increases.
And can I put it to you that, in my view, the key driver of not just industrial disputes but threatened industrial action, including within An Garda Síochána and teachers and nurses, was the issue of restoring the public sector to a single-tier pay structure, or what has been known as equal pay for equal work. Now, I have met yourself a number of times on this issue, and also the Minister on this issue. We had for some time tried to get a costing on how much it would cost to return the public service to a single-tier pay structure. in recent times, you and your department, the Minister, did give us that figure, it's €208 million. But it wasn't dealt with in the extension of the Lansdowne Road agreement. And I find it extraordinary that we would have an agreement that would seek to maintain industrial peace, but fail to deal with the driver of a lot of the industrial unrest and potential industrial unrest that still looms with some unions as well. I find it extraordinary that that one key issue, that for those unions that I've dealt with, that issue was not dealt with. And also I find it even more extraordinary given that we have a recruitment problem in some areas in the public service, and yet the issue of new entrants was not dealt with. Can you explain to me why that was the case? Did the department have, notwithstanding any requests from the trade union movement, would the department not have had its own priorities going into public sector pay talks? And why was that issue of returning the public service to a single-tier pay structure not a priority issue for the department? Yeah, thank you.
So, there are a number of different elements, Deputy, to the question. First of all, there's only a fixed amount of money available. So the extension to Lansdowne Road 2, as we're calling it, is going to cost us $880 million over the next number of years. So there's only a limited pot. Whatever money had been used for other issues would have been taken away from the general increase across the different grades. So there always has to be a trade-off and a discussion about what can you do within the resources. Many of the anomalies that arose out of decisions that were taken in 2008, 9, 10, 11 were addressed under the previous agreement. New scales were put in place that addressed much of the gap that existed. So there is still an issue there. The issue of equal pay for equal work, there are different opinions about this. In our own organisation, we have an assistant principal or an AO, and they're on the first or second point of the scale. They're doing the same work as somebody who maybe came in a few years earlier, but that person will be on a different point of the scale. So within the same grade, people are doing broadly the same work, but depending on when they came in, they'll be on different levels of pay. There are also colleagues who are on different pension arrangements. So you have people who are part of the single pension scheme and came in after 2012, and their conditions, their pension conditions, and after this agreement, their actual pension contributions will be very different to colleagues who came in before that. So equal pay for equal work it's open to interpretation, and it's open to issues.
But if I can,
one further point though in relation to it. Obviously, this mainly affects people who came in after 2012, and the new agreement leads to very significant reductions in the PRD contribution that people were making who came in after 2012. So they will benefit very significantly. So a lot of the new entrants who, as it were, lost out relative to those who came in before are now on a different pension scheme, but because of the terms of the agreement, will get back significant amounts of PRD compared to their colleagues who were on the previous scheme. So it's a very significant change. So I think there's a lot of different elements to this. I think the other issue is that any employer, including ourselves, needs to look and see what rates of pay are required to attract staff. After the end of this agreement, new entrants who came in after 2000, new entrants who come in, like for example the teaching profession, somebody who comes in on the 1st of January 2018, the starting salary will be 35,000, and then that will go up then to 37,000, 38,000. So the starting salaries, given the marketplace for graduates and given the starting salaries in the economy, are very competitive. In our department, we recruit administrative officers will be the standard recruitment graduate grade, and their starting salary is 29,500, 30,000. We have no difficulty attracting fantastic graduates in at that rate. So I think there's a balance struck for the government always to what's fair to different groups, but also to set a rate of pay that's...
All of the previous agreements, including all of the FEMPI Acts, cover to cover. So I know exactly what was taken from workers. What I'm talking about is from the 1st of January 2011, in addition to all of the other FEMPI cuts that were made, that category of workers who came into the system suffered further cuts. I'm also aware that there was some merging of the bands that was done, I think, in Haddington Road, and then there's the PRD changes that were made in the most recent agreement. So I fully understand what was taken and what was given back, but there is still situations where those workers are not on the same pay scale. So we're not operating a single-tier pay structure. You also know that it is an issue for some trade unions. It is an issue for them. It is an issue for that category of workers. We had a debate in the chamber on FEMPI recently. Some of those workers were in the public gallery. So it is an issue for them. And it was an issue, unfortunately, for the different departments that underpinned a lot of the threatened industrial action and potentially still further industrial action. And yet it wasn't dealt with. And I find that incredible, that it wasn't dealt with. Even as an equality issue, I would have thought you would have wanted to deal with that first. Notwithstanding all the other balancing act that you say you have to do, I just find it incredible.
But a large amount of the difference that arose has been addressed, Deputy, as you're aware. You don't need me to go through the numbers. But a large amount of the disparity was addressed by the merging of the scales and the restoration of the quals allowance. The only allowance that's notwithstanding is relation to HDIP, which is €1,200.
I'm not talking about allowances.
So,
I'm aware of that
but the allowances are very significant. There are 3,500, 4,000 of a qualification allowance, which wasn't allowed for the win, and that was restored. And there's been a merging of the scales, which puts people in. So, to suggest the issue that hasn't been addressed to the satisfaction of everybody, and look, sure, that's the way it is, occupational hazard. But you know, a significant amount of progress has been made over the last number of years since the FEMPI cuts, and the Minister has indicated there's a process now under the new agreement to look again at this issue. So
one final point I'll make is that I can tell you now, Mr. Watt, that those workers who are affected by that, and they're on low and middle incomes, who are struggling to pay mortgages and rent, certainly wouldn't see it that it was an occupational hazard. They see it as
it's an occupational hazard that does not.
For you possibly, but for them.
But we're not going to be. Yeah, but no matter who's sitting here, no matter who's doing this job or doing the job of government, you're not going to be able to keep everybody happy. You're not going to be able to address all the issues at any given period because we just don't have the money to address all the different issues.
And the cost of doing this was 200 million.
We have 880 million for 310,000 public servants. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So it's a lot. So if you take 208 million from that, there'll be a good deal less. And I've no doubt, Deputy, you'll be coming in then criticising the very low increase of everybody else in the event that if we did address the new entry issue dissatisfaction.
One final point.
I'm sure you would. Fair enough to make that point.
I'll remind Mr. Watt that he's not yet the Minister for Public Expenditure Reform. If and when you ever want to stand for election and become a TD, you're more than welcome to do so.
Okay, but Deputy, if you want, I'm here engaging. As you mentioned earlier, the lack of openness and transparency, I'm engaging with you openly now about the challenges we face. And in fairness, I'm setting out for you the position, which reflects the position of the Minister. I'm not giving you my own, I'm giving you the position as to the different trade-offs involved as best I can.
And ultimately, the adjudicators of whether what's fair is not fair is 300,000 public servants will be voting on it, and it'll be their decision, not ours, as to whether they agree with it or not.
But adjudicators for us will be at the next general election.
They'll do the vote.